Welcome to the Healing Centered Conversations podcast, where we create space for conversations that heal. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, a nationally certified school psychologist. I, along with our special guests, will give you insight to promote collective healing by putting people first. Through weekly conversations with educators, psychologists, and healers, we'll discuss ways to heal, thrive, and live your best life. This is the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Byron McClure. In this podcast, we create space for conversations that heal. Through weekly conversations with educators, psychologists, and healers, we discuss ways to heal, thrive, and live your best life. This is the Healing Centered Conversations podcast. On today's show, we have two very special guests, my brother Kendell Kelly and Dr. Julius Davis. Kendell Kelly is a first-year doc student in the School Psychs program at Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. His research focuses on race-related stress of Black male students, restorative practices, the school-to-prison pipeline, and Black men school psychologists. We also have with us today Dr. Julius Davis. Dr. Davis is within the University System of Maryland. He's the Wilson H. Elkins Associate Professor of Mathematics Education and the founding director of the Center for Research and Mentoring of Black Male Students and Teachers at Bowie State University. Shout out to Bowie. He has two main strands of research focused on Black male students throughout pre-K through doctoral pipeline and Black men teachers in urban and suburban schools. Dr. Davis and Kendell, welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast.
Hey, appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So I just want to check in. Like, how are y'all doing? Like, for real. Kendell, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. The semester's coming to an end, so you know how that goes. A lot of finals, a lot of papers. I'm a GA, so a lot of grading of essays. So it's real stressful. I'm looking forward to the break coming up.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Dr. Davis, how are you?
So my department chair, Dr. Linlong, says this thing, I'm doing the best I can. So if I had to say how I'm doing the best I can. This week is a very busy week. I was just sharing with you all offline. Today we had like a live podcast with our Bowie Man Black Males in Education community. Tomorrow we're taking that community to Statesman Academy for Boys in Washington, D.C. to engage the scholars and the educators over there. And then in the evening, we'll have our featured Black Male Teacher Speaker Series program. So it's a busy week, but all work that I love. So I'm happy to be here. And I'm glad you asked us to check in because oftentimes as Black men, we don't take the time to really make sure that we're well. We just kind of keep work moving and keep things moving. And so I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And especially with creating a space for healing, we got to check in with one another. And, but beyond the surface level, like we legit have to know and check in. So when I ask, like I really mean it. And I hope that becomes the norm for us. As we get into it, y'all, I've known Kendell for a minute now. He's like my little brother. So one, I'm excited that he's entering into, his first year as a doc student in the field of school psychology. I got to bring Kendell out to Anacostia, see the work firsthand, and he jumped right in. And so I'm really grateful to see you within this space. But for those who might not know, Kendell, introduce yourself. Who is Kendell Kelly?
Man, before I do that, I'm always shouting you out as my mentor. So it's like every new great thing you do, I say, oh, that's my mentor. That's what he's doing. He got me into the field, so I'm very appreciative for that. So as far as me, I grew up in both Maryland and Texas, so I'm kind of a healthy mixture of both. I come from a real spiritual background, so just always been in service to people. That's kind of been my life's mission, is how can I help people? So that's kind of how I got into this profession. I've been very involved in music and HBCU, so just figuring out how to serve my community the best way that I can. So that's the best way that I could give people an introduction to me.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the work that you're doing, you being a musician, and the path that you took. But Dr. Davis, for those who might not know you and your work, we're going to get familiar today, but please share a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you do.
Hold up. I didn't know Brother Kendell was a musician. He just, you get all the good stuff. I get, the academic stuff. I don't get the good stuff, but that's all cool. But he's still my brother too. I guess outside of what you shared, I would say that, I'm a father, I'm a husband, an all around committed Black brother to doing uplifting things for the Black community. As you shared in my intro, my work centers on Black boys and Black men, particularly in education. And so for me, I spend a great deal of my time thinking about ways to make things better with students at Bowie, students out in the community. And I just see it as a responsibility as a Black man to do that. That's who I am. I'm committed unapologetically to writing, researching, and doing real work for the Black community.
Yeah. And I love how you said doing real work, right? It's easy for it to be a facade, for it to be for show, but there's so much work that needs to be done in doing the real work, especially in academia around research. And we're going to talk about the research that you both recently did, which is sensational. But Kendell, I want to start with you because I've known you for a little while now. And like has been mentioned, you're an artist, a musician, amazing singer. You're also a doc student in your first year in the School Psych program. But ultimately, you had to make a choice between getting a degree and you actually had a record deal. And so I'm interested to hear, man, your thinking of choosing the field of school psychology, because that's a deliberate choice. So just kind of share your thinking and what went into making that decision.
I definitely chose it, but I feel like in a lot of ways it chose me. I think this path that I'm on has been the most consistent thing that I've done in my life. Music is my first love. I started that at a very young age, and that was definitely something that I was focused on. But that's the beauty of going to a HBCU. I was at Bowie. I was afforded the opportunity to be a part of a community that really took me in. And so I even, I dropped out for a semester, took some time off to focus on music and other endeavors. But the community at Bowie kept pulling me back and saying, you don't have to be a one-trick pony. You could do multiple things at the same time. And I'm really grateful for that because it's led me into a direction beyond what I saw. And so while I still do music, the community at Bowie afforded me the opportunity to continue my education and make certain connections to where it's like I could see my purpose being bigger than just one field in music. I could do music and, help be the change that I want to see in the educational system. So that's kind of how it happened. I chose it, but it also chose me.
Yeah, and that's dope to hear. And one thing that you said that really stood out is your experience at a HBCU, to where you had this community kind of wrap their arms around you and kind of show you something to where you weren't able to see it directly yourself. And that's some magic that happens at HBCU. And I'm sure many people have similar experience. I know for myself, I had a similar experience to where I wasn't able to see certain things, and I had mentors and teachers and professors to show me the possibilities. And you don't get that everywhere, right? That's something that we need at HBCU. So Kendell and Dr. Davis, you all just submitted a publication, which I think might be one of the most important publications of the year. And I know that might be a little bit dramatic, but I think it's that relevant and timely. And it was an article on increasing representation of Black men in school psychology through early exposure. And so, Dr. Davis, I'll start with you. What was this study about, and what did you all find in this study?
Really, this emerged from Kendell's work, really. As he was sharing in our background part, my area is not school psych. Through him and my colleagues at Bowie, I've learned a great deal about school psych over my 10 plus years at Bowie State University. So one of the things that I've often shared with my colleagues is it was hard for me at some point to distinguish what did a school psychologist did in relation to what a school counselor did in relation to what a teacher did. And my collaboration with Kendell really opened up that door to say, well, these are the things that school psychologists do. And these are also the things that they do that particularly impact Black boys in very negative ways. And so that dialogue started us on this journey of exploring where the contributions of Black men in school psych are. And really, as you all both know, is very limited. It's probably even more limited than what we talk about the less than 2% for Black male teachers that are in the school psych field. And to me, working with Kendell, what was very insightful for me is that basically the folks who make the diagnoses and do the assessments for our Black boys to be overpopulated in special education are school psychologists. So if we don't have Black men in there who are able to offer very culturally grounded perspectives beyond Eurocentric perspectives, then our Black boys are going to be doomed to continuous failure in the pipeline into special education. And so we started thinking, like, how are we going to increase the representation of Black men in school psychology when really to get to it, you get to it mainly at a grad level. And by that time, as I'm seeing and trying to get more Black men into teaching, high school is almost too late. College is almost too late. But then if we have to wait until graduate school, we're in even worse shape to get more Black men into school psychology than we are in other educational fields. And so we started brainstorming, like, so what are some ways that we can encourage folks who are interested in increasing the representation of Black men in school psychology to give them early exposure? And so the article kind of outlines some of our thoughts on like where we can get young Black men to be thinking about contributing to the field of school psychology early on in their academic.
And the work that you all are doing and what you just described is so very important and so true, right? Using myself as an example, some people might have heard my story, but it's exactly what you just said. I fell into the field clumsily on accident while I was already in graduate school. And I started out as a clinical psychologist on that track to become a clinical psychologist. And then just through happenstance, I met the right person. Shout out to Dr. Jennifer Shoemaker. And she introduced me while I was in grad school to the field of school psychology. And then I switched. And, you know, that's so many people's experiences. And let alone, you know, me as a Black man that's already started a program. And that's the first I heard of the field of school psychology. I had no idea what it was, didn't even know it existed until that random occurrence. And what's interesting is when you even look at the percentage of, like, you're absolutely right. We know that teaching within the teaching force is historically 2% of Black male educators. But within the profession of psychology, within the narrow profession of school psychology, that percentage has to be even lower. It's just to know if you all found that actual number. I haven't been able to find it. My estimates are it's less than 1% of Black male school psychologists. I'm interested
I would
to hear
agree
if you
with
found
you. I would agree with you, and I think there's not a lot of information on that because folks are not looking for Black men to be in school psychology. Nor are there a lot of folks who are doing research on Black men in school psychology. And that's why I was sharing with Kendell, like, this is a groundbreaking base for you to create a research avenue that no one else is doing in school psychology, focusing on the increased representation of Black men in school psych. I think the closest field is special education. And even in special education, it's probably very similar to school psychology. And that's the closest field to school psych that we can see in education that folks are doing some work around. But I think Kendell has an opportunity to make really his mark in the field, in the profession, by continuing to engage in this line of research.
And Kendell, on that note, I'm interested to hear some of your thinking around why this work was important to you and why you wanted to jump in and do this study. And then completing the study, some things that you found.
Before I get to that, I did see a number on the percentage of Black male school psychologists, and this was a couple of years ago, but I think it said that it was 0.4 of the profession were Black males. So I did see that number somewhere.
Oh my God.
And so Attending Bowie State University, that's one of the two existing HBCU training programs for school psychology. So being in that setting, I was very interested as to why more HBCUs didn't have programs. And that's one of the first things that I saw in my research was that HBCUs were not willing to bring a school psychology program to their graduate schools because historically, school psychology has not been a profession that's been kind to Black students or young Black professionals. So they're not willing to invest their money to funnel Black students into a profession that isn't really beneficial to their mental well-being. So I found that to be interesting. And then even going further back in the 80s, the director of the University of Iowa program, she did research during that throughout the 80s and was saying how school psychology essentially was the last realm of psychology to integrate. And so I found that to be interesting. So looking at those things and looking at recent research, I know Dr. Barrett and the African American Subcommittee have the NASP Exposure Project. I was interested and to see how we could target specifically Black males. So I saw the research that Scott Graves did on Black males in education, and I see the research that Sherry Proctor does on the presence of keeping Black students in graduate programs to be even able to enter into the field. So that's a little bit of the background that I have and being interested in this study. Also going to the NASP convention and seeing the disparity of Black school psychologists and just being...
You mean not seeing. Let's just call it what it is. You'll walk, look, Dr. Davis at NASP, you'll walk, it's these big convention centers, big hotels. You'll go all day without seeing another Black male school psychologist. And so when I first started going, back in about 2016, I'll look around and I'll see, like you see, is that a brother right there? And you give like the head nod, like that little acknowledgement that we have. And it's rare. And each year, it will be a handful more. It will be a handful more. Then right before the pandemic hit, the one in Baltimore, Kendall, you went to the one in Baltimore. That was the most Black male school psychologists that I had ever seen. We could still count them on our hands and we took a photo. But it goes to show that 0.4% of this profession, 0.4 is Black male school psychologists.
But then let's look at the what that looks like for Black boys, right? Who are the majority overly represented in special education fields, where school psychologists are the ones who diagnose their placement into those categories of disabilities. So, I think it's an area that most definitely needs further inquiry. And I don't think that we have talked about that enough in education from the school psychology lens in terms of how that has impacted the pipeline of Black boys in special education that leads them to the prison piece, which is one of the things that Kendell introduced in our conversations as to why he wanted to even be in this space, to disrupt that school to prison pipeline. But if you don't have the culturally sensitive tools, as Kendell has taught me, if you don't have the right mindset, if you don't have more representation of folks who look like the students who are being basically brutalized in this space, because it's really ruining a lot of young men who probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. But, we need all of those things that, I've learned from talking to Kendell about really what the field does and how it impacts our community.
Yeah. And so either Dr. Davis or Kendell, I'm interested to hear in the study that you all completed, what were some of and we might be jumping around from our script a little bit, but that's okay, because I'm really interested to hear in the study the connection of having more Black male school psychologists and any potential benefits to Black youth. Did you all look at that piece at all?
Yes. So when you look at representation, you see a direct positive correlation of the more specifically Black males that are in education, the positive outcomes that happen for Black boys in our school system. And so ultimately, one of the things that I found most interesting throughout our study is really seeing what works. How do you get Black teachers into the field? You funnel money into that background and giving them scholarships, giving them opportunities. So we know that our lack of intergenerational wealth through racist policies in America has set us up in a position to not really be prepared financially for college. So as an act of reparations, scholarships through education is a good way to level the playing field as far as equity goes. And so besides personal experiences that most of us have, being that a lot of us have black male mentors that led us into the spaces that we're in today, the research also mirrors that. And it shows that representation matters, and the fact that the more black males that are around black boys, that increases their chances for success, academically and socially.
So I think that we have seen that research more so within the teacher space. So like there are a number of studies that have looked at like the impact of black male teachers on black male students. But I don't think that we've done enough work around the impact of black male school psychologists on black male students. And I think that where I would highlight where our work fits in has been more researching what studies have been done, what work exists, and not so much. I know Kendell has been working to connect with folks that he knows in the field to interview them as sort of like a pilot to figure out like what direction should we be going to understand more about how black male school psychologists are impacting the field and impacting their students. And I know in Kendell's case, black male students. And so I think that that's something that we need further research into. But I think right now we've been kind of looking and surveying the literature around what has been done around black men in school psychology and what has been their impact. And I think right now, while we can make some assumptions, I think that we still need more research in this field to really be able to really document the true impact of black male school psychologists, sort of like what's been done with black male educators on the other side of the research field.
Dr. Davis, how do we reconcile that, right? Because on the one hand, it's not enough of us. On the other hand, if it's not enough of us, how are we going to do the research to continue the research that's happening, right? And shout out to Dr. Proctor. Shout out to Dr. Charles Barrett. Shout out to Dr. Scott Grace. Yo, I shout this out as often as I can. If it wasn't for Dr. Scott Grace, I would not have finished. I would have finished. I'm pretty resilient, but I would have had a challenging time finishing my dissertation. My research study fell apart. I had an entire study set up. It fell apart. I've reached out mentorship through Dr. Graves, and he helped me pivot. He introduced this concept of a meta-analysis. I was able to finish my dissertation. And so that mentorship is important. But if we don't have researchers like Dr. Proctor, Dr. Barrett, Dr. Graves, what you all are doing, how can we reconcile continuing this research? And is that part of the reason why you all decided to do this research in the first place?
So I think when you say research, I think there's a couple of levels to think about that, right? So one way of thinking about the research is that we need to collect the data to be able to inform our actions in this area. I think the other thing about research is that, and we don't do this enough, is that it needs to inform the development of programming that's going to change the dynamics. So for me, as a researcher of black male teachers, one of the things that I think that is important, if you research an area, you should have programs in that area that are also addressing the problems that you're talking about. Because scholarship alone is not going to correct the problem. Our everyday young brothers in high school and middle school and college ain't reading articles. So the only way that they're going to know about school psychologists is if they see black men like you and Kendell in their face to know that you actually are real and that you are represented in a field that they probably have had some contact with, but don't even know really much about it, right? So if you've been in that special education pipeline, you probably had a contact with a school psychologist and it probably didn't mean as much to you because you may or may not have known what they do. And so I think for me as a researcher of like black male teachers, you got to have programs to also support that. So we have a Black Male Teachers College program that exposes high school students to the field of education. And really like working with Kendell and others like Rodney Harrison and folks at Bowie, like it has allowed me to expand my thinking about black male educators. To me, black male school psychologists are educators too. Black male school counselors are educators too. There are a lot of professionals that work in school environments that are black men that are black male educators too, because they impact the young people that they work within those environments. And so I think that we need more programming to do that. We have a Scholar Fellows program for undergrad, masters, and doctoral folks. And that's still too, like for those who are interested in like research or making some impact with Black boys or Black male educators, then we need to be working together to one, understand the research landscape, and then also to understand what kind of information from this research that we can incorporate into our program. So we knew from research that we needed to start in high school. But one of the things that I've learned from actually doing the program is that we actually really need to be starting in middle school. High school, you have a lot of competition in terms of career fields. You got all these career and technical education academies at the high school level. And most oftentimes, students pick what they're going to do in high school in their 8th grade year. So really, if we're waiting until high school, we may be missing a great deal of a population that could be really helping to inform what we do in school psychology. But I think then we have another level to consider, right? So what do we tell them to do in high school? Because there's very little anything on school psychology in high school. So is there an AP course on school psychology? Does the school psychology course, AP course, include, does the school psychology course include anything about school psychology? So in high school, we're not even exposing them enough to school psychology. And then you think about college. If you're a psychology major, do you learn about anything related to school psychology? And so I think more undergrad programs need to incorporate some track or some level to infuse school psychology for young brothers who are interested in reversing the pattern like Kendell. And then once they get into graduate school, at least they've had some education to better prepare them for what's that like, and then to continue that work that they've been doing throughout their pipeline.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to know and do some investigating on if there's a difference at this happening at HBCUs. Using Bowie State as an example, you all are doing what I see as a remarkable job, right? You all are one of 2 school psychology programs. There were several other school psychology programs at HBCUs, but they lost funding. They're closing down. They're losing accreditation. But then you all's teacher prep program, your education program, is very strong. So I'm wondering if there's a difference in the experience of Black undergrad, Black graduate students in the field of education at PWIs versus HBCUs. That sounds like a really good next study. But Kendell, I would love
Can I add something on to what you just pointed out? I think another reason that maybe, another possible reason as to maybe why HBCUs don't have as many school psych programs is the accreditation piece is pretty expensive and it's demanding. And it requires certain structures to be in place for your program to be accredited. And for most HBCUs, accreditation is a very expensive endeavor, but most students' degrees won't be worthwhile if we don't have accreditation. So I think that might be another avenue why we don't have as many school psychology programs. And then also, too, how many Black professionals are in school psychology, whether they be men or women, who would be most likely to start it at an HBCU?
So I'm interested to hear from you all. In this study, what would you all say was either the most surprising thing that you learned, or what was the most important finding from this study? Kendell, we'll start with you.
I think the most surprising thing that I learned was that 0.4 percentage that I saw, and how I saw it was so few. Like, because you see the lack of representation at a convention like NAS, when you see all the talk around increasing the number of Black school psychologists, Black male school psychologists, but when you see the numbers, it's like, wow. So kind of as a joke, I did some math to calculate what that looked like. You know how they say, Black men, we want to be in the NFL, the NBA, and I calculated the numbers, and it's more NFL players than Black school psychologists. I have a running joke saying, based on the numbers, the NAS estimates, so I have a running joke saying, what I'm doing is harder than, making it to the NFL.
Yo, that's mind blowing.
So that was one of the things, just putting numbers to the issue that we always talk about and seeing how disproportionate the numbers are. So that's what I would start with that.
That is mind blowing, and that legit has stopped me in my tracks. Especially when you consider the need that's there, right? Like at the end of the day, the NFL is getting a lot of brothers paid, much respect. But school psychologists, we are providing a service that can change the trajectory of a child's life. And for us to have 0.4% of Black male school psychologists represented, this work is dire. And why I started this conversation saying that the work, the study that you all did is the most important study of this year. I firmly believe that. So, Dr. Davis, I love, or Kendell, if you have something, or Dr. Davis,
I do want to add something else. So, the numbers. Getting into the numbers is so important, like Dr. Davis was mentioning, because we always talk about the shortage of school psychologists as a whole. So we know there's a shortage in general. But then when you talk about how disproportionate the numbers are to Black school psychologists, you have to look at the reality of those numbers. And unless you see them and really put them into context, you won't understand the gravity of the disproportionality. So if school psychologists are already at a shortage in general, and we look at that huge disparity, what do you think the numbers look like if you actually look at the numbers? I think that's a question to really consider. And then when you get into the research on how to present that change, and then that's why there's a need to do the research to actually present the change and show how bad it is that there's a number like a 0.4 or a under 4% total. So I think it's really important to look at those things.
Yo, do y'all know how small 0.4% is? Like, just thinking about that it's not even 0.5%. Like, that's crazy. So, Dr. Davis, what was the most surprising or the most important finding from the study in your perspective?
Well, as I said, like, I got educated about school psychology from Kendell, right? And so I didn't realize, like, while we're thinking in teacher land that things are bad, in school psychology land, they're worse. And so, like, to me, as a person who does research on Black male teachers, I now have a better sense of, like, we really need to be adding into the conversation Black men in school psychology for so many reasons. One being the overrepresentation of Black boys in special education. We need them to help transform a very broken system rooted in racism, white supremacy. Even, like, as Kendell educated me too, like, most of the tools are out of that genre of research that looked at us from an inferior perspective. And so, like, if we're using those tools to determine Black boys' future and placement and disabilities, I think that that was something that was very eye-opening for me, that the tools that we're using to identify the Black boys are naturally flawed, but we're still using them. What does that do for Black men who want to enter this field when they know that basically their area of study has caused so much damage for so many Black boys? Do they want to join? I know we talk about that oftentimes in education. Black boys don't oftentimes want to become teachers because of how they're treated as students. But what do we say about school psychology when basically this field is responsible for putting a bunch of your brother's futures really in a bad place? And I think those were some things that were very eye-opening for me as I learned more about the school psychology field from Kendell, that there's a lot of things rooted in racism in this field that haven't been addressed yet. And we want to bring more Black people into the field, but we haven't had real, true, and honest conversations about race and racism.
Yeah. Dr. Davis, Kendell, as we bring this podcast to a close, I just want to open it up to you all for anything that might be on your minds, anything that's resonating that you want to share with our listeners in this moment. Kendell, we'll start with you.
Just echoing what Dr. Davis just mentioned, the need to have more conversations around race and where we're going as a field. And I do see that a little bit more. There are more conversations on Twitter and at conventions and conferences. But I think that there's never enough. And we need to see how we can take our field to the next level and repairing the harm done in our communities and becoming more staples in the educational system, better than we have been. So just doing the work to continue and see how we can grow as a field and become more whole.
Dr. Davis?
I guess what my closing would be is that we need to, my motto is that we need to roll up our sleeves and put in work. And I know for the both of you that you all are committed to that mantra, to putting in work for our community. And I think Kendell and I were considering doing an article for the School Psychology Journal special issue on Black boys. And one of the things that was shocking to me is that we've been having, in the larger field of education, scholars have been having the conversation on Black boys for a very long time. And you all are like just getting into the conversation. But you all's profession have contributed a great deal to the damage on Black boys. And so I think, as I'm thinking about like where Kendall's work could go and like really where he's kind of putting me in, I'm trying to really ride his coattails on this, especially considering that he's in his doc program and he's developing areas of research and developing his scholarship while he's a doctoral candidate. I think that this whole school psychology from a Black man perspective is a great avenue for him to continue to flush out research and publications around. But I also think that we need to connect this work to what Black men in school psychology do for Black boys. But I think that we can't excuse that the discipline itself is rooted in racism, white supremacy. And we have to critique that too. Because adding more Black men into a racist system is not going to change it. We have to do many things to change the dynamics for the field that haven't served our community very well. And so I think it starts with us with a commitment to that and like really being prepared for the uncomfortable nature of introducing a conversation into a field that hasn't been welcoming to Black boys and Black men. But I think that we have to continue to push the envelope and push the scholarship that's going to push the field to address systemic, institutionalized racism, white supremacy, and the issues that has caused for the Black community, particularly Black boys and Black men.
So we're going to have you all back to have a part 2 of this conversation. And one, I want to talk about work that centers us and that's safe for us to do and that's targeted for our community, right? Especially in terms of using SEL right now, looking at equity and how those things are under attack from predominantly white parents. We need to create spaces, bodies of research, programming that is for us, by us. And I would love to continue a conversation with you all on that.
I appreciate that because that's who's doing the work. If it wasn't for Black scholars like us, nobody would be talking from a strength and an asset-based perspective about Black issues or challenging the system of racism, white supremacy. And so I think all of those buckets that you mentioned are most definitely needed from us, by us, for us.
Absolutely, man. That's spot on. So part 2, you heard it here first, is coming soon. My brothers, Dr. Davis, future Dr. Kendell Kelly.
Absolutely.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and I'm inspired. I'm even more motivated to go out and change that 0.4%. And it's really resonating with me that it's harder to become a school psychologist than it is to make it to the NFL. That's ridiculous. And so we're going to amplify that. We're going to do the work that it takes to increase more brothers in this space. Thank you for tuning in to the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Today we had Dr. Davis, we had Kendell Kelly. Be sure to follow the Healing Convo Pod across all social media platforms. Help us grow by liking, sharing, commenting, and leaving a review. Tell a friend to tell a friend about the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Until next time, take care, everyone.